Come on, babe, why don't we paint the town? And all that jazz, I'm gonna bruise my knees and roll my...
So we chose Chicago because of the proliferation of stupid people being famous on the internet like the Kardashians. And when you're on Facebook, you start realizing how the internet and social media create false celebrity so easily. We chose Chicago because it's about women who murdered, these are true stories, in Chicago in the 1920s, murdered their spouses and lovers and became famous for it. We just thought, well, this is kind of a really good idea to take a piece that everybody knows and loves and reinterpret it ever so slightly for a modern audience to say, it's all razzle-dazzle, it's all bells and whistles until you lose that fame or you lose that notoriety, and then ultimately you're sort of a person. Fame is fleeting and ultimately pretty empty. It's more the way the set's built and the costumes, and there's some staging. For example, when Roxie murders her lover, they take selfies of themselves in bed first, which is completely mirroring how Kim Kardashian became famous, unfortunately. So that's what we did, sort of selfies in a few areas. We didn't want to be heavy-handed with it. It really seems like a period piece, but there are these little moments where modern culture will pop out. The set design, we wanted to feel like a fashion show. You know how in New York City, for example, for a fashion show, all these designers come in and they take this really broken down space like an armory or something and they turn it into glitz and glamour, but it's all bells and whistles. So our set is sort of cheap looking stuff that under light looks glamorous, but is really inside of an old broken down rotten theater, and we want people to feel that. And those large letters that spell Chicago, they're based on the Hollywood sign, certainly, and we wanted to be sort of behind the sign, sort of showing the dirt and grime and scum that happens behind something that is so iconic and beautiful and ultimately kind of empty.
We took that into the design in kind of looking at fusing the modern with the period, because the play is set in the 1920s and that's really important to kind of understanding the world. So that was where we started off, trying to figure out how to put together those two worlds.
Come up with a concept and what I would like to call maybe a roadmap. So there's certain images that we all respond to that if you ever have a question, say about what should we do for Razzle Dazzle, we would go back to these images that we all agreed upon and we would look for the answers in the collective sort of montage that we had come up with for every question asked in the process. And then we just sort of barrel through and try to pull as much as we can from stock, and we build some things. Nicolle designed a dress that was built from scratch for the court scene for Roxie, which is really fabulous, and we just try to piece it together.
Velma wears, it's this dress that's kind of styled like the 1920s, but it's incredibly sheer and it's a modern piece, and underneath you can see kind of more modern underwear. So that's kind of what we were going for, is that each person is wearing a mix of modern pieces, contemporary pieces, and then they've also got, 1920s influences.
And the piece that she's talking about came out from someone's closet, so it's a real piece, but it's based on a 20s pattern, and it looks very much like a 20s vintage dress, but it's a modern fabric, it's a sheer fabric, so we can tell there's a modern twist to it by the execution of the piece.
I think the time has been really necessary. Like the amount of progress that we've seen happen in the past week and a half, it's been like insane. Yeah. But I think for me, something that's been hard so far has been putting everything on the set, because all of a sudden there are like poles where there used to be no poles, and using stairs as opposed to like just walking around.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot more opportunity to fall.
Yeah, I think kind of going along with that, stamina is so huge, and once you do move it into the space, you have more to play with, you have a whole house to need to project to, so just keeping up that energy. And then especially once we do have an audience in the house, the adrenaline that you get, you have to maintain that. And you know, adrenaline can be super helpful, but it can also kill you in a second, and suddenly you're done after the first 15 minutes of the show and you still have a long time. So kind of just like navigating adrenaline and space and audience and making sure like you physically can get through the whole thing.
Believe it or not, the hardest and strangest thing was the curtain, to get the red curtain the shape that the designer wanted. And utilizing, if we had a solid curtain, that would be easy, but we're trying to save money, and we're using some pieces of fabrics that we had in storage, and we have to piece them together to create this shape. That you wouldn't be able to tell by looking at the set, but building the letters and the frames for the letters and the structure for the tower are things that we were able to figure out very easily. That curtain has become quite a challenge. The towers we built in a couple of days. The hardest part was bringing them into the theater. We just got a couple of people and we carried them out and we put them up.
The sheer amount, like the number of costumes that we have on that stage is crazy, and we have a great stock. Like we have hundreds of clothing items, but the 1920s isn't, we don't have as many of those as we could have hoped for. So I think the most challenging part was kind of just getting everything together.
You're trying to get what the product we wanted, given the limitations we had. Limitations being that 1920s, like Nicolle said, very hard to come by, very fragile even if we have them. Lots of them are just disintegrating in your hand. So they're beautiful to see, but you can't put them on stage for a very, very dance-heavy, physically heavy show. Yeah. And then being able to also get our product polished and well enough up with the constraints of budget. We have very, very small budgets here. And there's probably, I'd say, 80 to 100 costumes in the show, and that's a lot. So it was a challenge.
It was. But, I think what we ended up with was amazing, and we're both really, really proud of it.
Yeah.
We actually started working on this at the beginning of winter break. We started doing the research and the planning aspects of it then, because we couldn't start, any of the building until we got back to campus. So really we've been working on it for quite some time.
Since mid-November,
Yeah,
I'd say.
Mid-November.
And this part of it, sketching, coming up with ideas, making lists. You have to track actors.
There's a lot of paperwork involved.
A lot of paperwork before you even begin the design. There's a tremendous amount. And we've been working since day one, I'd say, of winter term. With our amazing costume shop, there's a very wonderful group of women that work here full time, and we also have a good amount of students that come in and do work study with us. And I always say we're only as good as the people that put the show up for us. So without them, we never would have been able to do what we've done. So they're incredible.